Hi, this is Anthony, and welcome back to my show. I love unsolved mysteries and looking at potential solutions for them. Obviously, if we're lucky with the advent of DNA and internet genealogy, sometimes identities can be definitively made. One of my favorite cases, besides D.B. Cooper, comes from Australia and is called the Somerton Man. I'm going to briefly look at that case, and even though it's not connected to D.B. Cooper, it's going to have some relevance that I think you'll agree is important. So be sure to watch until the end of the video. I'm going to give an extremely abbreviated thumbnail of the Somerton Man case. I encourage you to look at the Wikipedia article, and there are many very good YouTube videos and websites on the subject that you should check out after you watch this one. The Somerton Man was an unidentified man whose body was found on the 1st of December 1948 on the beach at Somerton Park, a suburb of Adelaide, South Australia. The case is also known after the Persian phrase tamam shud, meaning it is over or it is finished, which was printed on a scrap of paper found months later in the fob pocket of the man's trousers. The scrap had been torn from the final page of a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, authored by the 12th century Persian poet Omar Khayyam. Following a public appeal by police, the book from which the page had been torn was located. On the inside back cover, detectives read through indentations left from previous handwriting, a local telephone number, another unidentified number, and text that resembled a coded message. The text has not been deciphered or interpreted in a way that satisfies authorities on the case. The case has been considered since the early stages of police investigation as one of Australia's most profound mysteries. There has been intense speculation ever since regarding the identity of the victim, the cause of his death, and the events leading up to it. Public interest in the case remains significant for several reasons. The death occurred at a time of heightened international tensions following the beginning of the Cold War, the apparent involvement of a secret code, the possible use of an undetectable poison, and the inability of the authorities to identify the dead man. In this case, there are a lot of what seems to be mysterious clues and coincidences. When the body and clothing was searched, the fob pocket was evidently overlooked, and so the scrap of paper torn from a book was not found in the clothing until it was re-examined months later. The newspapers published an appeal from the police concerning the book and the slip of paper was from, and a man came forward with the book that the scrap of paper was determined positively to have been torn from. He said that somebody had thrown the book into his car through an open window, although published reports differ on whether it happened a few weeks before the man was found at Somerton Beach or just afterwards. In the book was found a phone number, another unknown number, and what appears to possibly be some type of code. As far as the phone number, it belonged to a nurse who lived in the area. In fact, she lived only 400 meters away from where the body was found. When police spoke to her, she said that she had no idea why her phone number would be in this book. She stated that at some time prior that an unknown man had come to her neighbor's house looking for her, but she didn't know who it was and that she didn't know who the body belonged to. When she was shown a plaster cast of the torso, it's reported that she denied that she knew who it was, but she looked away as if she recognized it and wouldn't look at it again. It should be pointed out that while the average person might recoil in horror over seeing the plaster cast of a deceased person, she was a nurse, and nurses are used to seeing corpses. In addition to this, the nurse, possibly knowing who the person might have been, although denying it, her daughter many years later claimed that her mother, the nurse, knew who the man was, and also knew Russian and didn't know why her mother would be able to speak Russian. This led to speculation that the mother might have been part of a Soviet spy ring. In this area, there were facilities and uranium mines connected to atomic research, and during the Cold War, the Soviets focused a lot of attention on penetrating Australia with its spies. Also, the fact that the deceased likely was poisoned or took poison himself, causing his death, is another indication that he could have had some ties to Soviet espionage, and that they wanted to get rid of him. There were also some indications that the Somerton Man had, or possibly had, some ties to the United States. His coat was manufactured in the United States and one that was not sold in Australia, although he could have bought it secondhand from an American, or he could have gotten it in the United States. Some thread that he had, which was used to repair his clothing, was also manufactured in the United States and not sold in Australia. And later on, somebody found an identification card issued by the United States for a merchant seaman whose nationality was given as British, who looked somewhat like the Somerton man. In the end, there were over 250 identifications made to the police about the identity of the decedent, although all in the end turned out to be incorrect. Since the mystery man had been buried, researchers wanted to exhume and test the body for DNA. Eventually, the body was exhumed, although it took a long time to get permission, and in the meantime, 3 hairs were found on the plaster cast made of the body, which had DNA that could be used. Eventually, an individual was identified via online genealogy. This mysterious person turned out to be Carl or Charles Webb. The last record of him was in 1947 when he left his wife and she filed for a divorce from him. He was an electrical engineer and an instrument maker, which would explain some of the tools that were found in his suitcase that had been left at a local railway station. He also evidently was fond of poetry, which would explain the connection to the Rubaiyat. What about these strings of letters written in the book, which are thought to have been a code? Well, evidently Mr. Webb was also a horse racing enthusiast, and it's now believed that there's a good possibility that what was thought to be some type of code from a potential Soviet spy was simply the lineup or results of local horse races. So how did he end up on the beach in Somerton? It's believed that there's a possibility that his ex-wife knew the nurse who lived nearby, which might account for him being in the area, looking for the nurse to see if she would reveal to him where his ex-wife was living. From what I've read, it doesn't seem that he had any children, so perhaps having given up trying to track down his ex-wife, perhaps having no living relatives at the time, and nothing much else to live for, he decided to go down to the beach, lay against a rock, smoke a cigarette, and consume some digitalis. Again, there was no ID found on him. Perhaps for some reason known only to him, he disposed of it prior to going to the beach. But if you were going to go to the beach, lay against a rock, and take poison while fully dressed, would you perhaps want to have your ID on you so that identification of your body would be easier and it wouldn't take 74 years? It would seem to me that it's quite plausible that he had his wallet in his inside pocket of his jacket, but early on somebody walked up to the body to see if he was okay, and upon determining that he was dead, whomever found him decided to take his wallet and leave. And then once the body was found and it made the news and people were looking for clues, whomever had the wallet and presumably his money chose not to come forward simply because it would show that he had robbed a corpse. I also find it a bit odd that this man, whose picture and description was put in a number of newspapers, was never recognized by his ex-wife, who, even if she didn't want to have anything to do with him, one would think that she would have seen his picture in the newspaper as the mysterious deceased man, that she might mention this to the police so that they would have his true identity. But she may in fact not have been aware of this mystery corpse. Just as today, back then, not everybody read newspapers, and not everybody was interested in unsolved person cases. So let's bring this back to D.B. Cooper, because that's probably why you're watching this video. The Cooper case is extremely mysterious. He was right there on the plane in front of witnesses, and then jumped out, and no trace of him has been found that can be confirmed to have belonged to him, or his parachute, or anything else, other than the $5,800 of the ransom money found about 9 years later under the sand on the beach downriver from where he was thought to have jumped. When researchers look at the case, they assume that he probably had some military background, probably had some parachuting or skydiving experience, but not necessarily a lot. He said he had a grudge, but not against the airline. Recent tests on his tie have indicated that he had some exotic metals embedded in the fabric of the tie that indicated a connection to the aerospace industry or other high-tech industries. A number of candidates have been proposed who have had military background. In many cases, have had some type of criminal background. In some cases, they have a connection to airlines or aerospace manufacturing or other types of high-tech metals research. Tantalizingly, there were at least 8 cigarette butts from cigarettes that he smoked while he was on the plane that he left behind. Evidently, those were subsequently lost or destroyed by the FBI, but if they could be found, they would have DNA that could be used to pinpoint his identity. It sounds like DNA samples were also found on the tie, although those could well be from other people that may have owned the tie or come into contact with the tie, including somebody talking at close range to the individual wearing the clip-on tie. In previous videos, I've stated that I don't think that the hijacker successfully survived the jump from the plane with the money, and I think that there's a good chance that the skyjacker did not intend to successfully land based on a number of factors. But whatever the motivation and whatever the identity of D.B. Cooper, if we ever find out, I think that just as in the Somerton man case, many of the clues will have turned out to be unintentional red herrings, and likely none of the proposed candidates that we have today will turn out to be Cooper. I could be wrong on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if when Cooper is identified, that he turns out to be a loner with few family and friends, who perished 51 years ago and whose absence was noticed by few and not reported by anyone. If you made it this far, I do appreciate you sticking with it, and I would love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this? And have you ever heard of the Somerton man case before this? What do you think about that? I've really only scratched the surface on it. It's a very interesting one. Even though it's been solved, please do some more research on it. I think that you'll find it very interesting. As I end here, please subscribe and continue clicking the like button and leaving those comments. I really do appreciate them. Thanks so much.